Good morning, everyone interested in El Niño. I am Stefanie Lux. I'm one of the two heads of the Anticipation Hub. My focus areas are learning, exchange, and innovation. I am very, very happy to see you all here this morning. At least in Berlin, it is morning. I know in some regions we are already far beyond. Thank you all for making it. I know these are busy days, and 90 minutes is a long time to take to listen to us. But we are really excited to have you. We have received a lot of requests as Anticipation Hub about the upcoming El Nino and what it means and where to find information that also helps us plan, coordinate, and implement our anticipatory action better. We see very different news, right? We see the media talking about a super El Nino, but we also see some forecasters saying that there's still, as we all know, a lot of uncertainty. So we are happy to contribute to this discussion, and maybe today will bring some additional clarity on what we currently know, what we don't. But also, I know a lot of organizations are wondering who is doing what, how do we connect? So this webinar in the first part will look at what the forecasts say, what we are currently expecting in terms of impact, a quick tour around the world, like what do we expect where and when. Also, how does it compare to past El Niños? In a second part of this webinar, we will then hear from different practitioners of different agencies and organizations to hear what, plans they have ready, how they plan to address this El Niño, and how you can reach out. One or two things. So one, this call is being recorded. We might put it on the Anticipation Hub website. And two, we would really like everyone, as Tim already wrote in the chat, to very quickly just write in the chat like who you are, from which organization, if you feel comfortable to do so. In the second part, we will also ask a bit more about your organization's plans and frameworks that you are working on or that you have ready. And we are also planning potentially a continuation of this webinar series, depending also on how the El Nino forecasts develop and the interest from your side. And El Nino website, you will see more information on this in a survey and the possibility for you to participate in these efforts in a survey that we will share at the end. As you have seen, we have quite an amazing lineup of speakers today, so I don't want to take up too much time with the introduction. I am seeing a lot of you already introducing yourself in the chat. I think that's lovely. So we know who we are speaking to and who participates, and it helps our exchange later. Without further ado, I would like to introduce the first speaker today, who will be really, guiding us through this first part of the webinar that focuses on what do the forecasts actually currently say. Hello, Chris Jack. Chris is the science lead of the Climate Center, the Red Cross Red Crescent Climate Center, so very much in the midst of it all, working with national societies on interpreting what's out there in terms of forecasts currently, but he's also the director of the Climate Systems and Analysis Group of the University of Cape Town. Chris will provide us a brief overview of what the forecasts are currently indicating. Thanks so much, Chris, for joining, and the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. My computer's going crazy with all the introductions in the chat, which is lovely. I feel like I'm getting to know you already. Thanks for the opportunity. I must say it's always a bit overwhelming trying to do this kind of briefing. Everybody's very interested, and the scope is global, and I'm sure you all have your particular context that you're interested in. So this is going to be an overview, and I also just want to say, even though I'm the science lead at the Climate Center, there's a whole team of climate scientists at the Climate Center who many of you engage with regularly, and we're all really happy and willing to engage further after this. So Let me go through the presentation. We've got a nice little time for questions afterwards. So I'll cover some ground and then we can have some discussion. But as I say, this is the starting point of a conversation. Right, let me share my slides. Okay. Yeah, so I'm going to provide a bit of an overview of El Nino. Last time I did a briefing, it was for La Nina. So El Nino was a few years ago. So a little bit of a reminder of how El Nino works and what we're thinking about it. Looking back at some of the past events, many of you will be familiar with how El Nino has unfolded in the past and have questions about that. And then, of course, the key one is the current forecasts. So let's dive in. If this is very familiar to you, then just spare me a few minutes. But I think it is useful just to go back to some of the basic science side of it. So just as a reminder, El Nino and the Southern Oscillation. So essentially, we're talking about the Pacific Ocean and the sort of neutral conditions. You could say normal conditions, though it's not often normal. Would be that we have these trade winds blowing across the tropical Pacific Ocean. These trade winds kind of push the warm water towards the western side of the Pacific Ocean. So we end up with this warmer pool on the western side and cooler along the Central American, South American coast. And that's the kind of classic pattern across the Pacific Ocean. What we're interested in is when this pattern changes. So we're just coming out of a La Nina phase. So La Nina is where we get stronger trade winds, we get more of that water pushed across, so we get cooler than normal conditions on the eastern side of the Pacific Ocean and warmer than normal on the western side. And that produces all sorts of impacts. And we've just come out of that period. So we've experienced many of those impacts. We've had flooding in many areas and other impacts around the world. Under La Nina conditions, which is what we're concerned about at the moment, of course, is where those trade winds slow down and in some cases actually reverse for periods of time. And that stops the transition or the pushing of the water across the tropical Pacific. And so we end up with an accumulation of warmer water on the eastern side of the Pacific, which is unusual, and the western side of the Pacific is cooler than normal. And this very simplified diagram just shows how this shifts global weather patterns by shifting these centers of convection and all sorts of other things that propagate around the world. So it's in the Pacific Ocean that we're watching, but as we all know, it has impacts around the rest of the world. So that's fundamentally the dynamic of El Nino, ENSO, the Southern Oscillation. This is a very sciencey kind of graph, but I think it's quite useful. So just looking back in the past, we can track the oscillation in different ways. What I'm putting up here is actually called the Relative Oceanic Nino Index, which is a relatively new way of measuring ENSO or measuring these cycles between La Nina and El Nino conditions. And it's an interesting one because what was recognized is with global warming, with increasing ocean temperatures around the world, the way we were measuring El Nino was being influenced by those changes in global temperature. So we essentially were distorting the El Nino index as the oceans warmed up. So the Relative Ocean Nino Index, or RONI, which is quite a nice name, is a different way of doing that that compensates for that global trend in ocean temperatures. But what you can see is the top side, the red side, I think it is. I'm colorblind. I think that's red. Where the graph goes into that top side, that's El Nino conditions, and the bottom side is La Nina conditions. What I've highlighted are what we might consider super El Ninos. So you would have seen this in the media, the fear of a super El Nino, and some discussions about past super El Ninos. Super El Nino is not fundamentally a scientific technical term. It did pop up a few years ago. It's not something that we often use as climate scientists, but it's really equivalent to a strong El Nino that exceeds something like 2 degrees anomaly. So you can see on the y-axis here from 0 to 3 degrees. Some events have even exceeded 2.5 degrees. So 2015, 2016 event has exceeded 2.5. It looks a bit different on the RONI index because, as I say, that compensates for the long-term trend. But what I'm highlighting here, the 82, 83, 97, 98, 2015, 2016, and I'm highlighting 24, 25, or sorry, 23, 24 on the right-hand side there. It doesn't look very strong in the Rodney index, and again, that's partly because of the shift in the index. But these are events we might think of as like super El Ninos or really strong El Ninos, and that's essentially what we're talking about. I'll come back to this later, but it is really important to note that we're not linking this to climate change. So we're not saying it's a super El Nino or the probability of a super El Nino happening is driven by climate change. We are seeing some of the impacts of El Ninos shifting because of climate change. But as you can see in this graph, actually, we don't see a strong trend in El Nino occurrences through time. But I'll come back to that point later. Okay, so what does it look like? This is December 2015 ocean temperature anomalies. So red means warmer than usual, blue means colder than usual. And this is a very classic pattern. December 2015 was kind of as the 2015, 2016 El Nino was peaking. It was a really strong El Nino, and we see this really strong pattern of warm water in the Eastern Pacific Ocean, cooler in the Western Pacific Ocean, and other patterns around the world that are also important. So this was the pattern for that one, and it was very sort of typical archetype, strong El Nino that had impacts around the world. The 23-24 El Nino looks fairly similar. If I just flick back and you blow your eyes a little bit. Fairly similar, though what you do see is much warmer temperatures across a lot of the Atlantic Ocean, and different temperatures across the Northern Pacific. So the point of this is that different El Ninos emerge differently. They develop differently through time, and other shifts are happening around different parts of the world. So we will typically look at tropical Atlantic Ocean to think about how El Nino will interact with West Africa. We look particularly at the Indian Ocean and think about how that will interact with El Nino for places like East Africa, for Asia, Indian subcontinent, and so on. So it's really every El Nino emerges in a different way. This is where we were in December 25. So this was the end of the last La Nina period. You can see a fairly classic kind of La Nina conditions. So there's cool water now across the Western or Eastern Pacific, warmer in the Western Pacific, fairly neutral conditions. And now we move to April 26. So this is one of the more recent sea surface temperature maps. And you can see a starting shift towards the patterns that I showed you before for El Nino conditions. But there are other things happening. There's a really warm tongue of water off the North American continent into the Central Pacific that is already having some impacts. There is a warm pool forming in the Eastern Pacific. The tropical Atlantic is relatively cool in many parts, and the Indian Ocean is fairly neutral at the moment. So it is emerging differently, and we're going to be watching the forecast of the ocean temperatures moving forward. Right. So what do we expect under El Nino? This is a very classic figure for those who've been around for a while. It's very difficult to map these things out. And it is also important to note that El Nino has different impacts across the world at different times of the year. So we expect to see different impacts emerging through the Northern Hemisphere summer, into the Northern Hemisphere winter, into Northern Hemisphere spring, and so on. So this is the period we're actually now sort of heading into June, August. El Nino is just starting to emerge. So we wouldn't necessarily expect to see a lot of these impacts in this particular June and August. We might expect to see them more into next June and August if it persists for that long. So we see, lots of conditions around the world, lots of dry conditions, hot and dry conditions, Central America in particular, South America, and the Indian subcontinent. Where we really start to see a lot of impacts, and this is because El Nino peaks through the December-February period in strength, but also because it interacts with a lot of other seasons around the world, is in this December to February period. So I'm in Southern Africa, and you can see a large area there, very warm and dry conditions, and that's what we're anticipating and what we've seen before. Certainly across the Indian subcontinent, we see impacts. We do see some areas where potentially wetter conditions unfolding. and sometimes that's associated with flooding events. So you can look at the area that you're interested in, and I'm happy to take questions further. This is, as I say, very, very generalized, and we'll come just now to the actual forecasts. I did want to step back a little bit and look at, again, to emphasize how events unfold very differently. So what I'm doing here is quite coarse. I just pulled out the SPEI index, which is a standard precipitation evaporation index. It's one we use for measuring drought, and it's a 12-month index, so it's very coarse. It's basically a year's deficit or excess of water. I've done it from July to June, so it covers the southern hemisphere summer seasons. Doesn't really represent everything very well, trying to cover a global picture here. But this is the 82-83 event, and you can see actually quite classic impacts. We see a very dry Southern Africa. We see the Amazon and Central America dry. We see large parts of the Indian subcontinent, down in the Philippines and beyond, dry conditions, and other scattered impacts. A bit of wet conditions in the Western North American continent, and then East Africa, a bit of a mix. East Africa is a very complicated space with El Niño and other impacts. If you look at 1998, it looks worse, and I'll get to that in a second, why it looks worse. Again, a lot of very dry conditions across northern South American continent. Southern Africa was a little bit spared in the 98 one. Up the East Africa area, quite a bit of wet, and yeah, Indian subcontinent all a bit mixed. 2015, 2016 was the really big archetype, strong El Niño events, and that matches what we would typically expect with a strong event. So it's probably quite an interesting archetype to look at. Very dry conditions in Southern Africa. Just checking my time here. And yeah, Northern South America and so on, it's Indian subcontinent. So that's an interesting one to look at. And then 23, 24 that we've been through most recently, a lot of very, very dry conditions. You may be looking at this thinking it's getting worse and worse. And in some sense, there probably is a bit of a worse and worse, but that's because this index also looks at temperature. So one of the things that we're really looking at a lot with El Niño, as it evolves, as we have different events through time, is that the Earth is warming. We're getting increasing high temperature, increasing evaporation. And so that's compounding with each event. So particularly in terms of drought, the increasing concern is the interaction of increasing temperatures with ENSO and El Niño. So this is the global temperature graph. El Niño events do release a lot of ocean heat into the atmosphere. So we typically have very or higher than normal global atmospheric temperatures during El Niños. I didn't put all of them in here, but you can see the most recent one is 2015, 16, and 25 back there, 24 and 25. Some of the hottest temperatures that we've experienced so far are typically associated with El Niño events. So we do anticipate that with an emerging El Niño, we would have an enormously warm temperature on top of this global increasing temperature. So I think for me, that's probably one of the biggest concerns about a strong El Niño now, is that we've actually continued to warm even since the last one, certainly since 2015, 2016. And that compounding of increasing temperatures in El Niño is particularly concerning. Okay, quickly on seasonal forecasts, because I know I'm running short of time, but I just want to say that seasonal forecasts are, firstly, they're either dynamic or statistical models, but typically we're using dynamical models nowadays. The key thing here is that these are not statistical extrapolations of the past. They are dynamic simulations of the whole ocean atmosphere system. So they're not just looking at what's happening in the Pacific Ocean. They're looking at sea surface temperatures evolving around the world. And that's why we rely on them really strongly to develop forecasts for a particular region for particular times. So it's really, really important to be looking at seasonal forecasts that are tailored for a particular region and interpreted for that region. We also use model ensembles because there is a lot of uncertainty, and the ensembles allow us to explore that uncertainty and the sort of chaos of the climate system. And when we're trying to look months into the future, there is a lot of uncertainty. So this is where we're at for the ENSO forecasts. You may have looked at these already. I'm just showing the forecast from 3 different sources here to show that there's a strong agreement On the left is the CCSR one, the IRI forecast that many of you may be looking at. And we can see almost all the models project El Nino developing. It's almost certain that it will develop. The question is how strong it'll be. Some models going very, very strong, over 2.5 degrees anomaly. The ensemble hitting around 2 degrees. For others, for the top right-hand one, we see, sorry, I think it's covering my window here. Oops. Again, a very strong forecast. That's from ECMWF, and then the one on the right, also very strong. So a lot of confidence that El Nino is developing and that it'll be a fairly strong El Nino. There's still a fair amount of uncertainty around how strong. There are other forecasts. So this is the Indian Ocean dipole one, the one that we particularly look at for East Africa and that broader region. At the moment, fairly neutral. The last El Nino we had, IOD, was very strongly positive. So we're currently looking at how that might evolve into the future. It doesn't look like it's forecast to shift very strongly positive, but definitely something that we're watching in the next few months. What does it look like around the world? This is going to be a very quick skim around the world. This is the ECMWF seasonal forecast for the June, July, August period. And we are seeing some of the patterns that we might expect. We have to always be thinking where are the dry seasons here, where are the wet seasons. So for example, at the moment in East Africa, June, July, August, is kind of, depending where you are, might be between the short and the long rains, or further north would actually be the wet season. So we do see some forecast of drying there across Central America, the expected kind of drying that we might expect, and across the sort of Eurasian continent. As we go further forward, September, October, November, it develops further. And here we actually see wet conditions across East Africa. That would be the short rains, wet conditions, drying across the parts of Brazil and Central America, and then strong drying again across Philippines, Papua New Guinea, that area. This is the IRI forecast, just to show very similar kind of patterns. June, July, August, things starting to develop across the world. And as we go further, July, August, September, and then into August, September, October, we see similar patterns of certainly drying across South America, the dry and the wet, the Horn of Africa, the dry Indian subcontinent, and other regions. Just quickly zooming into Africa, because it's the continent that I'm on. Again, we can see some drying across the Eastern African region, not much happening in Southern Africa because it's our dry season. This is the ICPAC forecast, which connects or resonates very well with the IRI forecast, which always gives us quite a bit of confidence. So it seems, there's a lot of agreement on some of the early forecasts. Again, this is not strongly necessarily driven by El Nino this early on, but as the year progresses towards September, October, November, we'll see El Nino, if it emerges as expected, having a stronger impact. Okay, we're out of time, so just to finish off, key thing is every El Nino event unfolds very differently, depending on patterns of other temperature patterns, Atlantic, Indian Ocean, and so on. So we should, while it's useful to look back at past events, we need to be looking at the current forecasts all the time. And we also need to be thinking around the local context. So we've been through weather extremes in the past seasons that will have impact on the local context. There's of course, local socioeconomics and conflict and health crises. We're looking at Ebola across parts of Africa at the moment, and other health crises. So we need to be, and you all know this even better than I do, we need to be thinking what is the current context and what would an El Nino, a strong El Nino, mean in that current context. So yes, looking back at the past, but also thinking about what's going forward now. And the key things, as always, going forward is monitoring, engaging with national and regional climate information. I can't emphasize more how important it is to be engaged with your local climate services providers, Met services, regional climate outlook forums. They're working hard to compile the best information possible for each region. So I'd really encourage you to do that. then thinking through the current local, the regional, and the global context again, what would it mean? Thinking that through, and then where possible, seeking expert guidance and advice where needed. Sorry, a bit of a rush at the end, but just to say, very, very happy to support further. Climate Centre are keen to support. We have a whole team who can help you think through these questions and challenges. So yeah, thank you. I'll end there and we can take some questions. Bit of a whistle stop tour.
Thank you so much, Chris. I already see one raised hand. Also, please feel free to put questions in the chat. We have a few minutes for questions, but Chris kindly agreed to also answer some in the chat once we run out of time. Odai, you want to start with your question? Can we? Yes,
Yes,
now we
hi.
hear you. Yes.
Sorry.
Hello.
Okay, this is Udai from WPHQ. I just want to, I don't know if this is look like an ape or something. It's just that from what I hear and what I read from different resources, it seems like 2015, 2016 was the worst one, El Nino. And correct me if I'm wrong or right. Maybe followed by at least this is after 1982. That's a long time ago. And maybe followed by 1997, 98, or 2023, 24. I'm not sure. But it seems like that was the worst. And just want to make sure that this is correct or not correct. Secondly, I would like to see if the current El Nino or the coming El Nino looks more like 2015, 16, or looks more like 2023, 2024, which is somehow I see in the map that is, I don't know, my impression in the map that 2023, 24 was looks as even worse than 2015, 16. But I'm not sure what looking like, what looks like now. Is it close to 2015, close to 97, close to 23, 24? That is my second question.
Thank you. Thank you, Udai.
Thanks, Udai. I mean, I think this is a question a lot of people are asking: is what will it be like compared to previous events? I mean, 2015, 2016 was a very strong event, as we all remember. I'm not at this point. I'm not confident to say. I don't necessarily think it's useful to say which event it's going to be most like this year. I think we're going to watch the forecasts emerge and the ocean temperatures shift. What I can say is that there are already differences that we're seeing. So like I pointed out, the Indian Ocean dipole is different in a different state to what it was in 23, 24. And some of the ocean temperatures across the Pacific and across the Atlantic are also different. So the key thing is we keep monitoring the forecasts, keep monitoring the latest information, and then last point is, yes, it is getting warmer. So we do anticipate higher temperatures, and that will probably be where it's unprecedented compared to previous events.
We have another question from Siraj in the chat. I hope I pronounce your name right, Siraj. What is your understanding of the potential interactions between the El Nino in Pacific and the El Nino Costero, the coastal one that has built up along the Pacific coast of Peru?
Interesting question. Yeah, I'm going to be honest and say I would need to look into that. Thanks, Siraj. I can follow up with you afterwards if you'd like. Yeah.
And I think this would lead to my question a bit, and a bit also a reaction to Odai. I think we have to be clear that a strong El Nino, it's as Chris said, it's not acting in isolation, right? So also what impacts it will cause where will depend on a range of other factors. There having been several hottest years on records in a row is one, but also ongoing impacts of other, humanitarian crises is another. I remember that way when we started with forecast-based financing at the time, everybody was talking about the monster El Nino coming in 2015, the Godzilla of El Ninos, they called it. And it did come, but in some countries where we prepared, like Peru, it actually did not have the impacts that were expected, but they came the year after with the coastal El Nino when they were not so heavily discussed, right? So for me, the question, Chris, would be, if we have one more, like, I mean, you showed the percentages a bit, like, but what what could you say about certainty at this moment? Like, what can we say relatively certainly, and for what do we just have to wait to get a better certainty?
Yeah. So in terms of El Nino itself, it's, I mean, I would go as far as to say it's basically certain it will develop. The question is the strength. Will it exceed 2 degrees anomaly? The probabilities seem high that it will. So I would say we should be at least planning for that. The uncertainties are the other drivers. So yeah, the coastal Peru phenomena, the Indian Ocean dipole that we're watching, the Atlantic, those, like Indian Ocean and Atlantic, as I say, seem fairly neutral at the moment, but could shift over the next few months. So that's where the uncertainty is those interactions with other factors. And also, to be honest, there's a lot of chaoticness in the climate system. So sometimes things just evolve in unexpected ways. So let's plan for El Nino, let's plan for what we can see in the forecasts. But as always, we need to be somewhat flexible. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chris. There was also a link posted. As Chris said, it's not something we can say definitely today. These will be the impacts in whatever, December in country X, but there are a lot of people working on this regularly, and it will be so important to follow this regularly to be ready in your region or your country. There was a link posted in the chat also on the climate outlook, the global climate outlook briefings, how to register for them. WMO, in honor of our event, is hosting a press conference just at this moment also on the El Nino and expected impacts. I'm assuming more info will come. Please, yeah, do feel free, as we are now moving to the second part of the webinar, to hear from the practitioners, but please do feel free to ask your questions to Chris also in the chat while we hear from the others. Thank you so much, Chris, again, for that great overview. Next, I would like to move to Jonas Berwitz. He's an anticipatory action specialist from FAO. And FAO and WFP, as you know, are among the major actors in anticipatory action, and also on board since that first Godzilla El Nino in 2015 when we all started pilots together. Yeah, and WFP and FAO are quite concerned about what's coming up and have also prepared a brief that will be published soon, I think. And Jonas, I hand over to you to hear what FAO and WFP are expecting and preparing for. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. So yeah, as you have mentioned, I will be talking a bit more about the FAO WFP global perspective and how we are preparing for the upcoming El Nino. Yeah, like this. So, but it has already been discussed, of course, by Christopher now, that the forecasts, they indicate a high probability of a strong El Nino developing during 2026, with impacts likely extending into 2027. And based on previous El Nino events, we know that droughts, floods, storms, they can have severe consequences for food security and agricultural livelihoods. So a key lesson from the previous El Nino events is that acting before impacts materialize is significantly more effective and cost efficient than responding afterwards. And so what we have been doing now, the FAO and WFP together, is to work on a joint anticipatory action appeal to mobilize early and flexible financing that can be deployed before the critical our agricultural and food security windows close. So basically what we have been doing is to do a global prioritization of countries, the most vulnerable to the upcoming El Nino. For this, we based ourselves on what is currently available in terms of forecasts. We also looked at the historical El Nino impacts, on the agricultural season timing, and then on levels of food insecurity and vulnerability. So these are the countries where forecast impacts are expected to coincide with key agricultural seasons, and they're creating a heightened risk of production losses and decreased food security. So this list also includes countries with existing anticipatory action frameworks that can be rapidly scaled up, as well as countries where we are working more on readiness efforts and where plans are being developed or strengthened. So you can see the countries on the right side. So now, yeah, what we know is that we are not starting from scratch. It has been mentioned already, the 2015 El Nino, the 2023 El Nino. So we are not starting from scratch. Across many of these countries, anticipatory action frameworks, trigger systems, and operational mechanisms, they are already functional. And our focus is now on building on these existing systems and ensuring that that they are ready to activate when forecasts reach the agreed thresholds. And this includes also strengthening readiness in countries where plans are still under development, coordinating closely with governments, OCHA, SURF, and other anticipatory action plan partners, and also aligning forecasts, triggers, and activation processes. One of the key messages here is from the exercises that the question is no longer whether anticipatory action works, but the evidence is there. It's now more a question whether sufficient financing and operational readiness can be mobilized in time to act at scale. Yeah, this slide just provides a brief overview of the types of anticipatory actions, which depend, of course, on the hazard and the country context. So, of course, flood and storm risks, the interventions focus on protecting lives and productive assets before the impacts occur. And you see some lined up underneath the picture. And for drought risks, it's similar. So we try to protect food production and livelihoods before rainfall deficits translates into crop and livestock losses. And then we move to the last slide, which is on challenges and uncertainties. So while the preparedness has improved significantly, we still have some challenges. There is, of course, the forecast uncertainty. It remains unavoidable. So forecasts, they will continue to evolve over the coming months, and impacts, they might vary within countries and regions. Then there is also the operational timelines, which are very short. In many countries, the critical agricultural seasons are already approaching quickly. So that means that the funding decisions need to be made now if anticipatory actions will be implemented on time. Then there is also the flexible anticipatory action financing, which is limited compared to the expected needs. And then the risk of delayed funding, which would lead to missed agricultural windows and larger livelihood losses, and ultimately a higher humanitarian response cost later on. So this is why FAO and WFP were doing this for the first time to come up with a joint appeal for this El Nino event in 2026 on anticipatory action. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Jonas. And could you tell us a bit, like FAO and WFP, in most of these countries, as you said, you are already active, right? You already have frameworks for the different hazards in place. In your view, like what's different now? Like what are you doing differently now, being potentially with these events potentially being linked to El Nino?
Yeah, I think one of the main differences is that we are now in a new stage of anticipatory action where before there was a lot of emphasis still on we need to provide evidence, we need to show that it's working. Well, at this point, I think we are, like in the last few years, there have been some high-level events on evidence of anticipatory action. And I think now we are moving more into like, yeah, this is working and we just need to get it done. So this is now maybe a new win going through. Yeah.
Okay, and it's like a more comprehensive, so it's not just preparing in country X, but looking at all of them that might be affected kind of
Exactly.
together, right?
Yes.
When will this be published and where can people find more information if they want?
So this will be in 2 weeks from now, we should be able to publish.
Excellent. And I
So
heard
we're
from Tim there will
finalizing and
also be a blog on the Anticipation Hub. So please, dear,
yes,
dear
perfect. Yeah,
audience,
it will be
keep checking.
advertised. Yeah.
Perfect. We will have a question block after the end of the practitioner sessions bin, so we will collect the questions then. Yes, but there is a lot of interest in more info and where to find it. And yeah, if you can post a link where it's already, then do let us know, Jonas.
Yes, we will.
And I think John might be able to help us out with some of these informations as well, like what's planned where and what's ready for which country. Let's see, maybe I'm expecting also too much at this point in time. John is the head of the Emergency Response Preparedness Unit at OCHA and will tell us a bit more where, the humanitarian system currently stands in its anticipatory action plans for El Niño. How ready are we, John?
Excellent. Well, that's a good question. Indeed. I hope you can all see my slides, and good morning, good afternoon. Yeah, so look, before I get into this, just by a quick way of background, as you mentioned, I head up OCHA's response preparedness. So I'm very much more focused in terms of sort of supporting our country colleagues and regional colleagues on operational readiness. But obviously, I work very closely with our AA and SURF colleagues who are based in New York. So the timing of this morning was a bit early for them. But on top of that, I wear a couple of other hats as well, which I think are quite relevant to this discussion. So I'm the co-chair of the global ENSO analysis cell that kind of brings together both the sort of meteorological side as well as the humanitarian practitioner side. Was set up actually after the 2015 El Nino as a way of us as a system getting better prepared around the analysis and sort of getting that kind of heads up that we've been speaking about this morning. And then on top of that, I'm also the co-chair of the Interagency Preparedness Early Action and Readiness Group. And the reason why I bring all of those together is that we are currently working on an analysis in terms of the upcoming El Nino, both in terms of anticipatory action, but also in terms of response readiness and analysis. So that will be coming out again in about 2 weeks. I think we're aligning a lot of these information products coming out shortly. But to get into just the meat in terms of where we are right now and where we're moving to, we've already gone through the situation, so there's no need for me to repeat that. I think the key thing I wanted to emphasize, though, is that it is different this time. I think we are definitely better prepared as a system to address the El Nino. In terms of the AA frameworks, as you can see here, we have a list up here of the different frameworks that we have in place already. We've got 11 specifically around El Nino and an extra 18 that are dealing with broader climate emergency type shocks. 5 have already been triggered. So we've already dispersed through the SURF funding 17.4 million to cover about 450,000. So that already, we're well ahead of where we have been previously in terms of the work that we're doing. As I mentioned, one of the things that we did over the last number of weeks is we brought together the global ENSO analysis cell. But this time as well, we've expanded that to include the Interagency Preparedness Group and also the Interagency Early Warning Analyst Group. The idea is to sort of bring together all of the kind of contributing areas from the humanitarian side so that we can have a very strong view in terms of the analysis as we go forward. And I think, as Chris mentioned in his presentation, we're at the start point now. This is going to be a constant monitoring as we go forward. We'll refine, as we've found out through the last El Nino. We had a set of priority countries at the outset, and those sort of got more and more focused. Certain countries we thought might be more vulnerable weren't, and other countries became vulnerable as we go forward. So it's really now getting that kind of groundwork in place, both in terms of AA side, but also, and I think this is, a really important element as well, is the operational response readiness, because it's great that we are doing so much work around AA and the success that it has. And I agree, we don't need to make the case anymore. I think we have the strong evidence around it. But equally, unfortunately, we're not able to prevent all of these impacts. So, one of the other key elements is that aspect around being responsible and being response ready. The other thing I will say, I think is also very important as well, is that it's not just at the global level, at the regional level, and particularly in terms of the key most affected regions, there are interagency ENSO groups already set up, doing analysis, working on the more operational side of things. So again, there's a lot of coordination with our colleagues in Panama, Nairobi, and in the Asia Pacific region as well as we go forward. I think one of the things we wanted to emphasize this morning, though, and this afternoon, depending on where you are, is, where we stand right now. There are kind of three windows that we currently have. And so it's really about seizing the opportunity to act within those. Right now we have the ability, in terms of some of the anticipatory action that we're doing, to protect harvest and infrastructure, acting ahead of the rainy season, in terms of safeguarding, in terms of livestock, protecting harvest and flood protection. So that's something that we need to, we have a window right now in terms to move on, but it's closing very fast. The second one is mitigating the immediate consequences. Again, all the kind of range of, different types of activities that we do in terms of anticipatory action. And then the third, as I was mentioning, is that whole area of operational response readiness, making sure that we have sufficient plans in place, that we have the capacities that we need, that we have the partnerships, etc. So those are kind of, I think, really important, and that's the key messaging that we're also giving, at an interagency level, in terms of just senior management to donors, etc. Is that there are different windows in time in which we have to operate. Moving on, you can see here, this is just a breakdown, and we'll share this, presentation after, in terms of the different AA frameworks that are in place. You'll see the ones that are triggered and also the ones that are in development. I don't think there's a need for me to go too much into that. It's sort of self-explanatory, and we'll share it after. The last thing I did want to, though, emphasize, and it has come up already this morning, is that, when we're looking at the impacts of El Nino, obviously, we had, in terms of the presentation on food security, but it does go beyond food security. And I think that's where we have expanded our work and our thinking, over the last number of years, is to look beyond just a food security lens, looking at health and disease. Sort of had mentioned, between the compounding factors that we have, and that's, I think, also one of the things that we're doing a lot in terms of the analysis, is, between, temperature rising, and also what we have in terms of whether it's the Strait of Hormuz crisis, the Ebola crises, etc. There's a lot going on, and so I think trying to actually weave that picture and to be able to present that picture as an overall package is really important. So again, it's looking across, the different sort of humanitarian impacts that may happen in the different sectors that will impact, I think, is just an important message to end on. And with that, I'll hand the floor back over to you, Stephanie, unless there are any questions.
We'll get to the question block to the practitioners more at the end, but maybe I can ask a follow-up question. I think I'm very happy to see, also the focus on heat stress, because, also with what we heard from Chris, but in general, there being the hottest years on record, and the hottest May on record in many countries also. Like, what do you have frameworks in place for that? Is that something rather new? Like in the list, I think it was mostly drought, which is normal, but like, how is OCHA addressing extreme heat as of now? I know it's evolving.
I think, it's evolving. And obviously, OCHA as a facilitator and a coordinator, it's really working through with all the different partners. And so I think that's, like I was saying, I think one of the key importance of why we brought together, not only the analysis component, but also in terms of the preparedness side of things as well, to really kind of look at these different types of risks and how we're going to address them. Obviously, the heat stress is something that is a relatively new area for us to sort of tackle. So it's still something that's evolving. We look a lot to the work that's done by the Red Cross, Red Crescent movement, particularly, who I think, have got, a lot more advanced in terms of the work that they're doing with their country societies in terms of this work. But that's, as I said, something that we're going to be working on over the next number of months. So I think also as well, these are good opportunities in terms of these discussions to also kind of get input as well in terms of the things that may be useful in types of activities that we need to look for and plan for right now.
And I said that we would have the questions at the end of this blog, but I just will take one forward because I was asking myself the same question. It's that, some authors talk about a global systems rupture going on or something, because we are at a crossroads where there's so many things happening at the same time. So there is one question in the chat, if the actions themselves, where you have, for example, frameworks in place for drought or for flood, are being changed to take account, for example, the rising fuel prices or the, fertilizer. We don't know how many or how much they will be available at what price and so on. Like if you are also looking into the actions themselves.
Yeah. I mean, no, exactly. I mean, I think that's look, I think that's the key with this whole element, is sort of the monitoring and then having that flexibility to be able to sort of, as much as we can, move on the go. And look, the other thing that we haven't really discussed this morning that's sort of, preeminent across all of this from the humanitarian system is, while we may be better prepared in terms of the systems, unfortunately, in terms of funding and capacity, we're in a much worse position than we were a number of years ago. So again, that flexibility is going to have to be key as we go forward.
Thank you so much, John. I'm sure there will be more questions later. Thanks for the great overview, and I hope we can share it on the hub later as well. I'm moving on now to Emma Mwangi, who's the Regional Anticipatory Action Coordinator for Africa at the International Federation of Red Cross, Red Crescent Societies. And as far as I know, also a bit of a meteorology nerd. Emma, so please, yes, we are very interested in your views, but also, of course, what is the Red Cross, Red Crescent planning, with some examples from your region? Yeah.
Thank you very much, Stephanie, and good morning and good afternoon, everyone, from wherever you are. I think on my initial reflections is agreeing a bit with the previous presenters that as this is imminent, we need to start preparing for it, but also communicating. And I think this is the key thing, communicating the uncertainty. I think all the noise we are hearing, we need to communicate with people that this is still quite far ahead, and we need to keep watching for regular updates. And I think, thank you to Chris, he mentioned that constant engagement with regional and in-country forecasting centers is quite key. And now for my presentation, I think I move people to the African continent. I think this is where we see the highest vulnerability, and also from Chris's presentation, we've seen the various areas that might be affected. And I'll go through, as the Red Cross movement within Africa, what are the plans that we are looking at, and what are the windows, especially of implementation that we are looking at, because that's quite key. And to start us off is the question of what is already in place. And just like the previous presenters, within Africa, within the Red Cross movement, we have quite some diverse approved EAPs that relate to hazards that might result from the El Nino event, looking at drought, floods in the east, heat waves. This is mostly for the Sahel. And newly coming up is epidemics. And you can see from the graphic think the stretch of those, we have over 25 EAPs already approved with some allocations. And what we've been doing in the past couple of weeks is mapping out the national societies with active EAPs that might be activated, and then following up that one, there is pre-positioning of stock, and also readiness activities are quite done. And I quite liken this with like preparing for a visitor. So we need to be prepared to have effective activation when that happens. Then also within the movement, the EAPs is not the only thing that's funded by the DREF. We also have other modalities. This is recognizing that AA is quite new. Not all societies have had the capacity to develop anticipatory action protocols. So there are two other funding modalities. One, there is the imminent DREF for sudden onset risks, for example, flood. And this has a timing of maximum 30 to a minimum of 3 days. And then the societies are able to access funding to do anticipatory action with also a bit of early response. And then there's another modality, the drought DREF, which then targets drought, which is a slow onset disaster. I know those of us who've dealt with anticipatory action have seen how difficult sometimes it is to define those anticipatory action windows for drought. And the drought DREF, what it does is then cater for this, that the societies are able to seek funding to do anticipatory as well as response activities around food insecurity, water shortage, and such like activities. So that's already in place. But then looking at the timeline and going back to Chris's presentation, how does that look like for Africa, considering we have almost 3 regimes that we'll be seeing? That for the Western Sahel, we are seeing June to September is when, from Chris's event presentation, we're already seeing some forecast of drying. And then coming to East Africa, as we move along the year, we'll see we are seeing a wet signal and then a dry signal towards Southern Africa. And what does that look like for us? And I might say it's not, oops, technology failed me there. I might say it's not one of the easiest timelines to follow through, quite complex, that starting with the Sahel and the western parts of the continent, we are already seeing initial activations based on that particular seasonal forecast, that with the drying period coming up, then some low-cost actions are already being activated. But then as we go through the season, considering the observations, the compounding risks in that particular belt, we are seeing that then we might expect then a second tranche of activations for high cost actions around October, November. And also that's where we would expect then the drought applications to start coming in to cater for the later impacts. But also keeping in mind is that it's also towards that end, towards the tail end of the season, that then we might see a potential wave of cascading impacts. And here I linked it up quite quickly with epidemics, because with water shortage, with the rising temperatures, the thing that we might quite quickly see is epidemics. Then coming towards the Eastern and Southern Africa, quite complex, because we are combining one drought risk and flooding risk in Eastern Africa. The good thing is that we are seeing a bit of window between July and August where heightened readiness activities can go on, external and internal coordination, resource mobilization can be going on within that period. It's not a very long period, but at least we have a window. Then then from September, we start seeing the initial activations by countries like Eswatini, Lesotho, who have already approved protocols, where in September, the seasonal focus then triggers low-cost actions. But then also within the season, if you look at the green box, is where then we might also see within season flooding activations, mostly for East Africa, and also imminent drought applications might come in. And then around December is when we might see the first wave of cascading impacts from the dry season that's beginning in the Southern Africa, but also from the wet season within East Africa. Then around January, February, mid-season for Southern Africa, then we might see the second tranche of activations with high cost actions, with cash transfers, for example, and then another wave of cascading impacts. But also to notice that through this timeline, we are quite keen to continue our internal coordination, our awareness sessions, which we are having with our delegations and our national societies, but also resource mobilization to complement the already existing modalities by the IFRC DREF. And to conclude, what does then this mean in terms of key messages is that within the movement, we are quite ready to act before the impacts, and this is based on the EAPs, but also the multiple AA funding modalities that are available within the DREF. The next thing is that for the region, especially in Africa, quite varying windows of activation, which means for some we have room to heighten readiness, do more resource mobilizations, but then for areas like the Sahel, it's actually we are in the go kind of sphere for anticipatory action. Then in terms of immediate priorities, something that was brought up by Chris earlier is to continue monitoring seasonal, but also sub-seasonal forecasts to inform then the heightened activations or activities that might go on. Then support to national societies, both to enhance readiness, but also to pre-position all the stock that's needed to anticipate or to implement anticipatory actions. Then one quite key that has been mentioned by the presenters ahead of me is strengthening coordination and resource mobilization, which are jointly done, then we make sure we have enough to address the needs of the communities. And then at the end is also we prepare for those potential activations with support funding, but also with technical support. And thank you very much. Back to you, Stephanie.
Thank you so much, Emma. A lot in the pipeline, but I imagine that it's also quite challenging for a lot of the national societies with all the response and difficult situations that are already going on in many countries. Do I understand correctly that in your region there are actually quite some that are looking ahead to El Niño related different type of hazards cascading or coming on top of each other or in the timeline after each other? And do these national societies get somehow special support or would need it?
Yes, Stephanie, we are looking at some societies that already have protocols for drought, but also cascading to epidemics like cholera, for example, looking at Somalia. And for those countries, they are given their capacity, then they do get extra support from the regional, but also from their cluster delegations. And also within the movement, we are quite rich that we have partner national societies. So there is quite operational, but also technical support that provided to our national societies. And also knowing that they're auxiliary to the government. So they also work quite closely with government counterparts to implement anticipatory action initiatives.
Thank you so much, Emma. We have one more presenter who is actually working for a local organization that is looking exactly ahead of at different El Nino related events potentially upcoming. Welcome, Samuel. Samuel is the country programs coordinator for PASIDA in Kenya. Samuel, are you here?
Yeah, thank you so much, Stephanie, and also the other colleagues on board, and good afternoon. So Stephanie, sorry, it's like my computer is not behaving. I sent you my presentation. Kindly, if you can put it up for me.
I will try my very best, Samuel.
Yeah, I'm trying on my side, it's like it's not working.
So Samuel is telling us a bit more about the reality in the communities, what the communities are expecting in Kenya, and how PASIDA helps communities prepare. Let me check, Samuel. Is everybody seeing this correctly now?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, perfect. Then Samuel, please start.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much again, Stephanie. And so basically, as I was hearing from the different presenters, we were coming from, all the way from global. And now I'm bringing you back home to Marsabit County in Kenya, the cradle of mankind, where we all belong at one point, according to science. And yeah, so basically, as an organization, we are working in northern Kenya and also in southern Ethiopia. We are very strong in addressing humanitarian development as well as also peace nexus approach. And in this, we are also having cross-cutting themes where AA or anticipatory actions plays a very key role in terms of a trigger mechanisms model informing our actions. So as you see in the map, in the green is where we work majorly for the anticipatory actions. We are in Samburu County in 2 wards, in Isiolo County, and also in Marsabit County. Sorry, this is Marsabit County, Samburu County, and Isiolo County. So basically, so far, what we have put in practice is we've developed anticipatory early warning protocols or guidelines for drought for the Marsabit County and for floods in Samburu and Isiolo counties. Some of the interventions at community level that we were able to implement over the last 5 years because our AA activities or engagement started in 2000.
I am not sure if it is my internet or somewhere's internet. Tim, do you have the same disruption?
Yeah, I think it might be problems with Samuel, unfortunately.
Samuel, can you turn your camera off? Sometimes that helps, not always. We have problems hearing you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, much better for now.
Okay, thank you. So I was just saying, so some of the actions include community awareness raising, early cash disbursements, also supplementary feeding to livestock, especially milking herds when the rest of the livestock has moved away for pasture and water. Also development of boreholes and other water sources for the communities. We can move to the next one. The next slide, kindly. Yeah, Thank you. So in terms of reflecting, we hear now, there is this potential, El Nino that's expected in 2026. As we reflect at the previous one, which had a lot of effect, a negative effect in our counties, in Marsabit, Isiolo and Samburu, and that was the 1997 El Nino, which was very heavy rainfall, and which actually had both positive as well as negative impacts. But the positive impacts were less compared to the negative impacts. But basically, it replenished, the water sources, restored rangelands, and also produced abundant pasture for livestock, which actually, translated into healthier bodies and also increased human food security and better health. But now, on the opposite side, it had very negative impacts, and one of them was the spread of flooding, which actually claimed lives, destroyed property, destroyed road networks, and also essential services by cutting off people and villages that they were not be able to be reached or also reach the other side. It also brought about malaria and other diseases like Rift Valley fever, which also damaged human as well as also livestock. In general, the overall, perspective about this El Nino was that it remembered as both recovery, but also much more a disastrous period. And I think you can see in the pictures, some of the pictures of then, and even this one here was also one of 2020, 2023, 2022. Next slide, please. Yeah. So basically now in terms of preparedness, looking ahead, is that we are looking at, reactivating the technical working groups so that we can strengthen, the coordination of the early action guidelines. Then we are also relying on the information from Kenya Met Department, which work very closely with the National Drought Monitoring Authority. And they work very closely now with the technical working groups, even including the water resource authorities. Another looking forward action is also to prioritize, early warning information dissemination at community level, where community actors, like also the community resource persons, play a big role in terms of cascading the information at the community level. Some of the key messages that we would like to share and be able to put across the communities is the need to be proactive, and especially at the county level, sub-county, and also ward level, and even at village levels. Then we also have, we ask ourselves this question: why anticipatory action? It saves lives, and it also saves livelihoods through proactive and focused-based early action. Some of the key gaps that we see, one of them is being a fragile easy action coordinated. Easy early action coordinated services because also because of being it also faces a lot of challenges of lack of dire services like health and also other government services. Then last but not least is also the support. One is we are also calling for capacity strengthening, because multi-agency coordination is very key, and also early warning and preparedness systems and teams is very, very key. Second is also resources, because of course we know El Nino, such kind of disasters like El Nino really comes with heavy demands in terms of resource allocation. And so through the AA approach, we're really looking for pre-positioning resources in advance. Then lastly is also the investments, because of the heavy expected huge impacts of El Nino. It could always be through floods or also through droughts for our region. Then resilience infrastructure and also sustainable health and also veterinary services is very, very important. Otherwise, thank you for now, and maybe I keep to wait for questions.
Thank you so much, Samuel. One question from me, and then we move to the questions in general to all the practitioner presenters. Samuel, like when you currently talk to the communities about, upcoming potential El Niño, like what are people most worried about at this stage, and what's maybe more difficult to grasp at this moment or to communicate at this moment?
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie, for the question. So one is, I will say in the past few years, what had been the key issue from the community is the doubt that you share with them this information and they doubt it. But now, the last 2-3 years, there's been a new approach in Marsabit County where we have a multi-sectoral and multi-agency approach to information dissemination and information gathering through participatory scenario planning sessions, where even the community foreseers are also included in the process, all the way even at the dissemination level. And so the communities are starting to gain confidence of information sharing. But now with our community, I mentioned that the key hazard for us is drought. So people, when they hear of El Nino, they are not so much as scared as when they are waiting for, waiting for, let's say, floods is not as scary as waiting for the drought. So what will be a little bit tricky for us is to convince them that it could also be floods. And we also know that floods also equally affect our communities. And so it is the challenge we see is convincing them that El Nino is coming and it also has challenges just as much as the drought will have.
Thank you so much, Samuel. And what concrete impacts are you most worried about? Like if we talk about the flood.
Yeah, the most concrete effects will be, one is a cutoff of communities from road networks. Normally we have communities that have road networks issues. They also have even the communication issues, communication network issues. And so when the El Nino, let's say when the floods are very high, then these communities will be cut off from even support, from even humanitarian assistance. Some of them even lack like M-Pesa services because of lack of communication like Safaricom. And so this is one thing that we are majorly worried of. And two is also, of course, the damage that floods come with, because they normally wipe away villages that are in the lowlands. They whip away, they go away with the household, let's say household utensils, household property. It wipes also livestock, and especially during water days. Sometimes the rain will just come unexpectedly. And also the other major one is also outbreak of diseases, like especially malaria and rinderpest and also Rift Valley fever. And last but not least is also the general destruction of roads, even for travelers like motor riders, because it can really be disastrous along the main highways. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samuel, for this insight. And yes, we also saw your requests. So let's see if following this webinar, there are, there's more reach out. Ehrlich, you have a question, and please, everybody else, now is your time. Please also put either your hands up or put your question in the chat to any of the presenters. Ehrlich, you want to speak? I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Not sure.
Can
There
you
you
hear
go.
me?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm having only one question for Samuel. Samuel, I'm from Namibia. Especially also in Namibia, we are also experiencing the problem, especially for us, is flood and drought. You can move from drought in 1 month, another month is flood. And most of our water is not originated from Namibia. The water is originated from the highlands in Angola. And that water is flowing from Angola to Namibia. By the time that water is reaching Namibia, the rainfall in Namibia have already started. And we are having a little bit of we are struggling with capacity strengthening, especially when it comes to multi-agency coordination on early warning. Since I can see here you are having now the predicted one and the one that happened in 98, 97 or 97, 98. What will be the advice or a good advice when it comes to multi-agency coordination? Because the people that are affected, the government is responsible to act, but the government will only react once they get enough information from either Red Cross or other international organization. Now, my question is, how can we strengthen our capacity when it comes to anticipatory action in Namibia? Thank you.
Is that a question to Samuel or to everyone?
First of all, I would prefer it from Samuel because I can see Samuel. They have something that has occurred, and they have predicted something that they are working towards. Especially like for me, it's like now forecasting, linking them to the trigger-based anticipatory action. That's what I'm trying to hear from someone first, then we can hear from other people. If is that fine with you?
Thank you. So Samuel, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. And yeah, I would just say, of course, you know, a multi-sectoral approach is very important. And I would say that as a county of Marsabit, over the last few years, we have been, you know, reportedly recognized as the most coordinated county. And we have our coordination in this sense that we have, you know, a county government, and we also have the national government represented by what we call the National Drought Monitoring Authority, and also the community, which is represented by different actors, like even the, you know, the NGO agencies, and also the community representatives. So when now what is happening is the target at the end of the day is the community. And for us, we are dealing with the pastoral and agro-pastoral communities. Like 96% of the population is pastoralist and agro-pastoralist, keeping livestock and also doing a few of agriculture or crop production. So these people previously, they used not to believe the science because these are traditional people. So what they tend to believe is their own traditional forecasters. And now the last few years, maybe 3-4 years, this is realized within our region, and now they are also incorporated when they say the decision makers are making decisions and they are making predictions. So they're also brought on board. You know, they slaughter their animals, they read at the science, they read at the intestines, and they compare now the notes with the science people or the scientists. And then when the information is now jointly combined and the report is given back to the communities now have the buy-in. Now they are accepting the information when they are given, because they say even our own people are also telling us, at their own level, at their own village level. So this is really taken us another level where there is trust and there is acknowledgement of the information and people taking action. So last year we had a search in October, and after all the information was shared at the community level, the communities were able to sell their livestock in good time to be able, because the drought was predicted, and they were selling their livestock when the condition is still good, the body condition is good, they fetch better, funds, money, and they are able to save the money for other uses. Not even that, when they are told now you need to move to closer to water points because, the drought is going to exhaust water from shallow wells. So they are able to move and to listen to the information. When they are also told there are issues of insecurity, when you are all combining in one area, because that's where pasture is and water, so you need to bring, sanity by sending elders and also community representatives to be able to share peace information at the forefront, at the hardest level, and they did this, and this really has given us a lot of footage in terms of moving in the right direction. So my advice is, one, it is very important to combine efforts. With one person, with one organization, it's not possible, but with joint efforts, with the synergy creation, with the collaboration, it is possible to be able to address and also be able to mitigate these issues a bit in good time. Thank you, and sorry for taking a lot of time.
Thank you, Samuel. Very good points. And we also saw it in your presentation and partly also in the presentations of Emma, John, and Jonas, that coordination is key, right? We have not talked yet, but we are thinking of follow-up webinars to look also more into detail for each region, what is planned for each region and who is active. And we know that in many regions, it's now increasingly also governments taking the lead or being very involved in anticipatory action frameworks. We see regional organizations coordinating, being very involved in different regions. So do fill out the survey if you are interested in having such follow-on webinars that go more in depth on one region. We have 3 minutes left, and I would ask the other presenters if you have a question to this audience, and otherwise I would also like the audience, yes, please fill out the survey, but if in 1 or 2 bullets you can write in the chat what your organization has in the pipeline, and if you feel ready, do let us know. And also in terms of coordination, especially for countries like Namibia, where it's maybe not so obvious to see who else is active, do also always feel free to reach out to the Anticipation Hub. At least
Stephanie,
we have quite a bit of an overview of what's happening in each country and can connect you. Yes, Ehrlich.
Stephanie.
Yes.
Actually, there's something that I also wanted to add to what someone said, especially the indigenous knowledge integration into anticipatory action.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you have to come at the elder's house, the house is under flood, and you are telling her to move, he might not move until he sees a certain bed or a certain insect. So this type of information, we also need to integrate it, or we have to collect it either scientifically.
That is very true, Ehrlich, and I would really encourage you to reach out to the working groups, for example, of the hub. I know that the locally led anticipatory action working group is discussing, for example, about exactly this, because as you say, it's important, but it's not only relevant for El Niño, right? It's in general, when we work with forecasts, we have to take such things into account.
Yeah, thank you very much, Stephanie.
Thank you. Dear fellow presenters, any last questions you have to this audience in the 1 minute left? I think everybody is a bit El Niño'd out after the 90 minutes. It was lovely seeing all of you here. Yes, Nesta, we have one more. Do come up. Oh no, she disappeared. Okay, then I will continue my farewell words. Thank you very much for your interest. If you are interested in having more information, more events on this, do let us know via the survey. Chris, did you have a last question for the audience that you would like to ask? No, you just wanted to wave goodbye.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for taking the time. I know it is busy days. Let us know also at the hub among the presenters how we can help. If you have questions on who is working in your country, please do feel free to reach out to us, and we will put you in touch to the extent that we know and we have the global overview a bit of who's active in what country, also flagging our global overview report that you can check out. Thank you so much, everyone. If you are so interested in this topic that you want to hear more about it from a slightly different angle, slightly different speakers, but similar content, there's another edition this afternoon. Otherwise, we will see you in future webinars and community conversations of the Hub. Thank you so much, everyone.
Cheers, bye.